All right, let's look at how to figure out ridge length. And we're going to focus on hip roofs, but I want to step back and just talk about how to find ridge length on a gable roof. We've gone over this. So we've got our outside of building here, and the ridge length is pretty easy to calculate, right? You take the overall length of the building, and then you add on any kind of overhang for the rake end, and that gets you your overall length of ridge. And we went over this in class. There may be a fly rafter, there may be a barge rafter, there may be barge fascia that you have to deduct from this overall length, but you can pretty much just count that up, right? If you had another piece of trim, out here, you could figure out your overall rake and then subtract the thickness of the material until you got the amount that was overhanging on the ridge, and then just add that to the length of the building. So again, with gable buildings, it's very easy to figure out the length of the ridge just by measuring and then adding on the extra bits that you need at either rake. With hips, once you understand the geometry, it's also very simple to remember this. And so what I have here is a plan view of a hip roof, and the red line represents the calculated length, right? This is your theoretical length, and I'm going to zoom in right into this intersection. And so in our gable roofs, we learned that you calculate your theoretical length, and then you have to cut back the top of the common by half the thickness of the ridge. That's a common, that gets cut back as well. So the three commons are exactly the same. Then we'll talk about this in another video. You have to cut the hips back, but that's different geometry. We'll go through that. But this is how all the actual beams come together. So we know this is a common. We know this is the same common run. And we know that it butts into the ridge here. Really, the theoretical length goes to here. Right? That's our calculated length. But because we had to shorten it for reality, we had to shorten it half of that distance right there. Right? Half the thickness of this common over here. So, if we know the building length, and we know the total run, so not the span, but the total run, we can pretty quickly figure out the length of that ridge. So we have the building length, we have to subtract a run, and we have to subtract another run over here, right? So our ridge is this piece right here. And then we have to add half the thickness of the common over here, and half the thickness of the common over here. Because again, the lengths that we've calculated go right to there. So here's our adjustment for reality. We have to add a little distance here and the same distance down at the bottom. So if you wanted to reduce this, to a formula, you could say that the hip ridge length, so that's our hip ridge right there, equals the total building length, this is something you would measure, minus the total run, right, which remember is half the span, on this end, minus half the total span or the total run on this end. Then you have to add back half the common thickness on this end and half the common thickness on this end. So you could say building length minus 2 times the total run plus the thickness of a common rafter will give you the length of the ridge. Right? Remembering that all points go right to here, so that's what you've measured. So you want to add back that little distance which is half the common on both ends of the ridge.